So as Mel said, I work at Brookhaven, and I work with the relativistic heavy ion collider, which is sometimes also called BRIC. And as he mentioned, this machine discovered the quark-gluon plasma, which is a substance that is actually 250,000 times hotter than the center of the sun. So really hot substance, and it's still liquid at this form. So it's a really very special substance, and it's actually at the core and the beginning of our universe. So I was always interested in high energy, but also interested in the energy production and consumption in everyday life here on Earth. And I'm particularly interested in the connection between energy and human society and human civilization. So when we think of energy, what is that? So we think maybe of warm sunlight, a power snack, a tank of gas, or a speeding car. These are all different forms of energy. So energy can both be doing work, such as lifting a heavy load, or running on a treadmill. And it also can be the possibility of doing work in the future, such as an electric charge in a battery, the food we eat, chemical energy in a tank of gas, explosive energy in a stick of dynamite, or the highest level of energy, the nuclear energy in uranium. So these latter examples that I described are forms of stored energy. And stored energy is what we typically think of. It's being extracted from the ground. It can be accumulated. It can also be bought and sold. However, when we talk about energy today, we mainly talk about fossil energy, which is the energy stored in the organic material of plants and animals that lived hundreds of millions of years ago. So fossil energy, which is mainly coal, oil, and natural gas, and its availability has been in the news recently and for quite some time now. Wars are being fought about the access to fossil energy, mainly in the Middle East. In fact, the fortunes of whole countries rise and fall today, depending on whether they have it or whether they have to import it. We know today that the extraction of fossil energy, fossil fuel, is endangering the environment, and its use is actually responsible for changing the world climate, and with possibly catastrophic consequences. Nevertheless, today, energy problems are often only expressed in terms of the high price of oil. However, the real cost of energy is quite difficult to determine. It typically only covers the cost of extraction and collecting of the energy, and then transporting it to the consumer. And as we can see from the wild fluctuations of the price of oil, which is an important source of energy, we don't pay for the energy content of oil, but we pay mostly for its trading value, including speculation. However, probably the closest that one can get to the real cost of energy is when we pay for somebody else's work. Now, all of us have lived our lives in this age of fossil energy, and understandably, we have difficulties imagining what life would be like without the ready availability of fossil energy. Nevertheless, we are using up the available fossil energy at an immense rate, as if there was no tomorrow, literally. So, when did we start to use fossil energy? We only started about 200 years ago, and if we continue at the rate we're going, we'll have used it all up in another 200 years. That is, in about 400 years, an extremely short time, we literally have burned up all the remains of hundreds of millions of years of life on Earth. But another and more immediate consequence of burning all this ancient material is the release of all the stored carbon into the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide, which is a potent greenhouse gas. So the sudden release of all this carbon is completely unprecedented in the history of the Earth, and it will drastically change the global climate and could have dire consequences for the survival of the human race. Need some water. Now, if we want to understand the importance of energy to human society, instead of following the money, we need to follow the flow of energy from its origin, mainly from the sun, to powering our activities here on Earth. Even though we often refer to energy consumption, energy, in fact, cannot be used up, nor can it be created. It can, however, be converted from one form of energy to another. And so the flow of energy from one high-quality form to another low-quality form of energy is, in fact, the foundation of the evolution of our universe and also the evolution of life on Earth. So what is high-quality energy? High-quality energy is typically very concentrated, it's directed, and is characterized by differences, for example, between hot and cold, dark and light, or bright light. Low-quality energy, on the other hand, is diffuse, spread out, and is characterized by uniformity. The stars of the universe evolved by converting the very high-quality fusion energy, which is extremely concentrated, to low-quality heat. Life and living organisms developed by using high-quality directed sunlight to create complex structures like DNA, carbohydrates, and proteins, and radiate lower quality energy in the form of waste heat. And the carbohydrates and the proteins, and that we all know from our food, are also a form of very concentrated high-quality energy. And in fact, all life continuously needs this high-quality energy. For plants, it's the directed sunlight. For animals, it's the carbohydrates and proteins, to maintain its own structure against the constant assault of decay, and also to create new structure. For plants, this means using the directed light from the sun to assemble carbohydrates from carbon dioxide and water and releasing oxygen. This is a very complicated process and also involves a delicate balance of investing enough energy to grow tall enough to collect a sufficient amount of sunlight. And only in favorable conditions can plants succeed in this and, in fact, survive. Animals, on the other hand, get all their energy from plants in the form of carbohydrates or from other animals in the form of proteins. Now, to collect this energy by either eating grass or hunting prey, they have to first expend energy. So survival for animals means they can extract more energy from the grass or the hunted animal than will be expended during chewing and digesting of the plant material or during the hunt. So through trial and error, natural evolution has found over hundreds of millions of years ways to make the net energy in this balance to be positive for those species that survived. We don't know about the ones that didn't survive. They didn't quite get it right, I guess. But the balance is always a fragile one, and small changes in the environment can make survival difficult or impossible. So this delicate balance of expended energy and collected energy is also true for we humans. About 2,000 calories of food energy per day are needed for our survival. So for subsistence living, where this energy has to provide for survival, including shelter, for finding food for the next day, and also for reproduction and child rearing, the daily energy need is actually significantly higher than it is for our more sedentary life. Thus, early humans had to spend most of the day foraging for food or hunting animals. So, in a favorable environment, the human body can find the daily amount of 2,000 or 3,000 calories. In fact, we would not have survived otherwise, of course. But finding access to this minimum amount of energy and going beyond it has driven human development and human civilization as well. So the close connection between energy and human development is illustrated by the fact that we started to cook food. Only humans do this. But why are we doing this? Today we think, of course, it tastes better. However, by cooking food, which is a process of pre-digesting it, we can extract about 30% more energy from the food. So that doesn't seem like much, especially if one subtracts the extra energy we need to expend to gather the wood and make fire. However, at the same time as when we started to cook our food, our brains also increased in size. This might be a coincidence, but it could also be that the extra energy from cooking food allowed our brains to get bigger. The brain uses a lot of energy. Our 3-pound brain, which is about 2% of our body weight, uses about 20% of all the energy that we consume. So this example shows the close connection between energy flow and human development. It also shows how technology can help us with gathering more energy. But this increase of only 30% was actually quite modest for such a major breakthrough in technology development, that is the controlling fire. So similar modest advances in energy collection were also achieved through farming, which had very far-reaching consequences of human civilization. But at its origin, it was an attempt and a way to increase the amount of energy collection. We also started to use domesticated animals, as well as other humans as slaves, to do our work, an additional way to increase the amount of energy we have available. In fact, slaves have been, throughout human history, essential to allow some humans to escape from subsistence living. So much of what we today know as the culture of societies before the discovery of use of fossil fuels was in fact created on the backs of slaves. This was the case for all the ancient societies, but also for the medieval kingdoms, up to the recent use of serfs in Russia and the use of slaves by the British Empire and here in America. But today, fossil fuels are providing us with an enormous amount of high-quality energy for very little work on our part. In a dramatic change in human history, starting about 200 years ago, humans had abundant energy available without spending much time and energy collecting it. This has changed human society in a very profound way. In today's world, every person, on average, uses a total energy of about 40,000 calories per day. Not all in food, actually. The smallest part in food. But this is 20 times more than the minimum amount of 2,000 food calories. And this is an average over the whole world population today. Energy consumption for every person in the US is about 200,000 calories per day, or about 100 times the energy a person consumes as food per day. All this additional energy consumption supports our modern lifestyle. of climate-controlled living, many conveniences, individual transportation, consumer products, and many more things. In fact, all the amenities and more that used to be reserved for aristocrats with many servants. So in a very real way, fossil energy has given everybody his or her own 100 servants. So we truly live in a historically unique time. Never before has any life form on Earth had access to almost unlimited energy without investing much energy first. More than anything else, more than technology, more than large-scale wars, population explosion, or even democracy and human rights, this is probably the defining feature of our times. In fact, I think that all these hallmarks of modernity that are listed are a result of having access to a large amount of fossil energy. We could not have started to think about the equality of people with fundamental human rights if it wasn't for all this energy available to provide comfortable living conditions to everybody, instead of having to exploit the lower classes or use slaves to provide it only to a few. It is therefore not a coincidence that the French and the American revolutions occurred and slavery was abolished just when the age of fossil energy got underway. So in just a short 200 years, we have become fully dependent on an easily accessible source of energy, not just for bigger and bigger vehicles, but also for the structure of our society and for how we treat our fellow human beings. We now urgently need to start to transition away from fossil energy. As I mentioned before, it will eventually run out, but it could also destroy the world we live on. But how can we do that, since we're so dependent on it? First, we need to reduce the use of energy on a global, local, but also personal level. In fact, this should not be too difficult here in the US, as we use so much more than the rest of the world. But as we do this, we have to be mindful of the fact that every device designed to save energy itself requires energy to produce it. This mindfulness does not come natural to us anymore, as it did before the advent of fossil energy, when everything had to be produced with our own energy. But reducing energy use has its limits. Short of returning to subsistence living, we will need a new source of energy. And even at the subsistence level, the world could not support today's population, because ever since the Green Revolution that started in the 1960s, food production, with its complete reliance on synthetic fertilizers, has also been largely based on fossil fuels. It is difficult to find a new source of energy that provides a lot of energy for little energy investment. An instructive example is solar energy collected with solar cells. To collect enough energy to power a home, it takes many large panels of highly sophisticated solar cells. However, this can be compared to about 100 barrels of oil that contain enough energy to power the home for the typically 20-year lifetime of the solar panels. Whereas it takes little energy to extract 100 barrels of oil out of the ground, the production, transportation, and installation of solar panels can take a substantial fraction, if not all, of the energy that the solar panels collect during their lifetime. Note, in fact, that the recent price drop of solar panels is partially just the result of using cheap coal for the production of the solar panels in China. A similar situation exists for wind energy. Both wind and solar energy are low-density energy sources, and need complex installation and a lot of energy investment to collect this energy. In some ways, by relying on only solar and wind, we would return to the time before fossil fuels, when always substantial energy had to be invested to collect energy. So it is highly questionable whether our lifestyle or the world population could be sustained using only solar and wind energy. Most of the development of renewable energy, such as solar and wind energy, has focused on bringing down the cost. But as said before, we shouldn't follow the money, we should need to follow the flow of energy. Often this meant moving production to low-cost countries to automate production and using cheap fossil fuel for the production of the solar panels. None of this actually reduces the energy invested in the production, and sometimes might even increase it. To make renewable energy a viable future energy source that can replace fossil fuels, research will have to focus on drastically reducing the energy used in the production of solar panels and windmills. Because if you think of it, eventually we will need to be able to build solar panels and windmills with the energy collected by then existing solar panels and windmills. We have no fossil fuels to fall back on anymore. Now finally, a few words on nuclear energy. The energy released in breaking up or fission uranium nuclei is highly concentrated and is therefore a very high quality of energy. The energy was stored in these heavy nuclei during the supernova explosions of massive stars billions of years ago. When our solar system formed, uranium was part of the material that made up the planet Earth, and now the slow decay of uranium in the core of the Earth is responsible for the hot center of our planet. The abundance of uranium, the high quality of nuclear energy, and the lack of any greenhouse gas emission would make it the ideal and maybe only energy source that can replace fossil energy. However, the huge amount of energy stored inside a uranium nucleus is also the source of the horrifically destructive power of the nuclear bomb. It is in this way that nuclear energy entered human consciousness for the first time. And it's therefore not surprising at all that the use of nuclear energy was always overshadowed by a deep fear, especially since radiation from nuclear decay is invisible to us, but if intense enough, can harm us or even kill us. But nuclear radiation is nothing new. As mentioned before, radiation from nuclear decay heats the inside of our planet. We couldn't exist without it. And on the surface, we were always exposed to nuclear radiation since the beginning of life on Earth. Even though we can't see it, nuclear radiation is important and likely essential part of our environment. The present generation of nuclear reactors cannot explode like a nuclear bomb, but in rare cases can develop an uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction. All reactors in the US have now containments that prevent any leaks of radioactive material in such an event. But this has come at a great cost. New reactor designs that are inherently safe, when an uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction is not possible, in fact, exist. But the nuclear industry has been very slow in adopting anything new. Also, today's reactors use only about 1% of the energy contained in the uranium fuel. This wasteful use of the fuel is also the reason why the used fuel elements are so highly radioactive for a very long time, tens of thousands of years, and create a very dangerous waste problem. However, it would be much better to use 100% of the energy stored in the uranium, which then leaves waste with quickly decaying radioactivity. Technologies to do this were first developed here in the US, but the development was stopped in the 1990s. In recent years, intense work on these types of reactors has restarted in China, India, Japan, and also in Europe, but not yet in the US. So finally, to address the energy and the climate challenges, and also to build a more humane society, requires that we become aware and confront our deep dependence on the easy availability of fossil energy. The present mindset of taking cheap energy for granted is in fact hampering the development of more energy efficiently produced wind and solar energy collectors, and has many led to dismiss nuclear energy as a viable new source of energy that could solve the world's energy and climate crisis. So it's urgent that we change this mindset and start addressing the world's energy problem more effectively. Thank you for your attention.
We have time. Would you like to take questions now or prefer to do it later?
Either way.
We have a couple of minutes. Go ahead.
Okay. Any questions?
You mentioned nuclear energy only using 1%. So does it seem like realistic that in time, research could actually use 100% of that energy?
This is not only realistic, has already been done. This is not necessarily a big problem. However, it's a technological problem to do it safely and do it energy efficiently. Just as I described in the wind and solar, the same problem does exist for any other technology to extract energy. You have to extract more energy than you put in. And that is an issue for nuclear power as well. Also, not as my personal view, not as much of an issue, but it is.
Could you possibly summarize what we as consumers can do on practical, everyday level in language that I can understand?
Right. So that is actually a very difficult question because, as I was trying to point out, is we are so used to the use of energy, the availability of energy. And so most of the things that you can think of doing that are really beneficial in that sense means not doing things. Right? Not driving the car as much. And so that's probably the most efficient, most best way of saving energy. As an example, for example, I drive a hybrid car, a Prius. And they say, oh, this is wonderful. That uses, gets 50 miles a gallon. So I use half the energy or a third of what an SUV would use. But on the other hand, it costs about $10,000 more or $5,000 more when I buy a Prius than a comparable car like a Corolla. This $5,000, why is it so much expensive? Because there's more stuff in a Prius. And more stuff takes energy to build. So I can't claim that I use less energy when I drive a Prius than if I drive a Corolla. And so we have to be mindful of that. So the easiest way is to not do things, as opposed to try to doing it more efficiently. But
What's the purpose of the colliders?
What's
the purpose of the colliders?
Oh, a collider. So as we operate at Brookhaven, it's to understand nature at its most smallest scale and its most highest energy scale. So that's to study the beginning of the universe, but also to study the structure of what's inside us. So when I talked about this quark-gluon plasma being 250,000 times hotter than the center of the sun, the same thing happens inside us all the time. The nucleus, the protons that are at the center of the atoms that make up our body, have a piece of this inside of them. So the temperature inside us at this small scale is also that high. So we don't really understand what nature is like at this very small scale, even though it's part of us all the time.
Yes, Bill Carr. What research, I don't feel that there's enough research being done with regard to proper storage of energy, and such as wave and the tides, and using it to push water uphill to use, restore it and use that energy later, or supercapacitors, or improved batteries. What can you tell us about better
Yes,
storage?
that is clearly an additional problem of both solar and wind, that the energy is produced intermittently, and so if you want to use it when the sun doesn't shine, you need to store it, or if the wind doesn't blow, you need to store it. So storage is a big problem, and what you mentioned is clearly one of the oldest forms of energy storage, pumping water up a hill, and then when you want it, you let it come back down and running a turbine. That is a very efficient, a very good way of doing it, but you can't do it at all places. But just along with that, I was talking about plants producing carbohydrates. That is actually the plant's way of storing energy. That's how plants take the sunlight through photosynthesis and put it in storage, which is carbohydrates. And so the plants actually solve this storage problem very well. And so in many ways, a plant is a solar collector, solar energy collector, which has all the pieces that we still try to put together, namely a self-assembling photocell, which is a leaf, producing energy in a highly concentrated form in terms of carbohydrates, and then stores it in the trunks or the branches. So they have this energy available to get through the winter when there is not enough sun. So a plant is actually a very complete solar collector, and developed through probably more than 1 billion years of evolution, natural evolution. And my challenge, I think, is to think of, can we do any better? I sort of doubt that we can do much better than plants can with technological solutions like solar cells and batteries and things like that.
Thank you so much.